Over the past year, I've been documenting and making portraits of young women students. In my time as a student, I've always been fascinated by the world of large format photography, as well as just portraiture in general. I would say that I started off in landscape. I started off as a painter, and black and white landscapes have always really intrigued me, but recently, during the end of my degree, I became fascinated with large format. There's quite a few influences for me. Big ones like Judith Joy Ross, Alice Tomlinson, obviously people like Alex Sof, Deardorff, and all of their ability to portray a person's physical nature as well as their psychological state, with their ability to create narrative within their work it's incredible. And I've always loved photo books and the way they operate as a photographic platform for artists and photographers to display their work and tell their own story, tell their subject's story. It's an incredible world to be involved in, and I'm really lucky to have had such a great experience over the last 3 years as a student studying photography, being surrounded by my peers and lecturers who have really pushed me, and also vice versa, we pushed each other to create work outside of our comfort zones, and also play to our strengths a little bit. This series of young female students I called Encounters. It wasn't until the end of the project that the title really started to form, and the first sort of 5 or 6 images were made within a 6-week period, and I went about documenting some of my friends, others acquaintances. I reached out through Instagram, just through people I knew, friends of friends, housemates, and I visited them with a big 10.8 Deardorff camera, and after my first portrait of my friend Martha, I realised that there's absolutely nothing scary about making a portrait of someone you don't know. It's easy enough approaching someone you do know, your friends, your family, and saying, can I sit you, can I make a portrait of you? But when you start to reach out to other people, strangers and things, I used to be so anxious at doing that and stopping people, or even just reaching out to them and going around to their house and making pictures of them. But the first couple of photographs made with this big camera, it takes 10 minutes to set up. So you and the sitter both become extremely relaxed around each other, which creates this really interesting dynamic between the photographer, the camera and the sitter. And those 3 elements what really has stuck with me throughout my period of making photographs, not just of these girls, but also through other projects that I'll sort of maybe share at a later date. The idea behind this series wasn't necessarily to create images that were beautiful, or really take pictures in general. It is really to conquer a fear of mine, and that is approaching people, and that is taking photos of people I don't know. I'd already achieved that by the time I'd reached halfway through the project. What the project was really about was the encounter, the experience with the subject, and all these people were more than willing to have their photograph taken, but some, as you can see or maybe not see in the photographs, were a little bit nervous, or not quite sure, or a bit more shy, and it took a lot more convincing for them to open themselves up to the camera. Saying this, I think all of the pictures I've made have been really successful. There are a lot more shot on 5.4 that were not successful at all, and this led me to start to use larger formats, and just the magic of using a 300mm lens on an 8x10 camera. If you haven't done it, you need to do it. Even if it's not your cup of tea, just try and fail, because it took me, still doing it now. I'm still trying, I'm still failing. But these portraits became an extension of myself, as a young male, as a young white male, making pictures of female students, we're all in the same boat together, or we were when we were students. But I feel a responsibility now to express my own views through my own photography. Lost my mum a couple of years ago to cancer, and all my work since then has been about her, whether it be obvious or not through my work. You know, sometimes it shows, sometimes it doesn't. But this series of women, of these girls who are now my friends, I saw so much of my mum in a lot of them. Something I haven't really discussed before in this project. But it's only now that I'm looking back on some of the images, and I'm sort of, I'm going back, I'm re-editing them, trying to just organise my workflow now that I've got the time, making a few more portraits here and there of my friends. And it became really clear to me after making a portrait of my friend Poppy recently, that I love to connect with these people, and I want to do this more with people I don't know. A lot of the people in the photographs I sort of, I touched on that sort of but the skill of making a 10-8 5.4 photograph has taken a year just to actually get clean negatives, clean photographs that I feel confident enough to share with other people. But all these girls remind me so much of my mum, all their personalities, their looks, how they interacted with me, all different elements, all mixed up in one. At the time it was just, I'm making a portrait of this girl who was confident in front of the camera, and this magical sort of, the depth of field, and the beauty behind creating a 10x8 photograph. At the time, that is really what it was all about, and I struggled to explain because I had 6 weeks to do it. It was set within a university module. But now I've had time to process it, a year on, making portraits every now and again. It's suddenly become really clear to me what this project has, been shaped by. And I think a lot of my work is shaped by that. Traumatic events in everyone's life helps to better them as a person, and also to, help destroy parts of us that we like and we don't like. Grief is an extremely powerful thing, and it not only affects you in horrible ways, but it also can benefit you. I have experienced extreme grief and lots of trauma, but I've come out a really, really strong person, and my photography, in my opinion, reflects that. I'm now confident enough to say and to share my work with others, something that I was not at the start of my degree. So I'm going to show a few of the photographs now, and these images were all made within the 6-week period. As I said, I was using an 8x10 Deardorff camera. This is all shot on Fomapan 100 and Fomapan 400 with a 300mm lens. And each person I met, I took 2 pictures of, two negatives. And more often than not, one negative was rubbish, it was ruined, something went wrong with the dark slide, light leak, developing issue, etc, and the other one, it was just pure beauty, and scanning it in was just like, I was sort of blown away by how amazing this bit of silver is on this digital scanner. At the time as well, these were all printed out quite big. You can see behind me I've got a few of the experimental ones, just sort of A3 size, but the original ones that I showed were framed 50x40 in just cheap frames, and they were really, really effective. I hope one day, when this project has really started to pick up some images, it's still in its early stages now, and I think it's a series that I'll be doing for years to come. But when I've got more people to photograph and I've got a bit more a bit more confidence on my back, I hope to have these all printed and displayed, and that's a long-term dream of mine, as well as potentially having a book published and things like that, but we'll talk about that another time. So these images were at times quite difficult to sequence and quite difficult to, I don't know, look at after 6 weeks of looking at the same type of images in, you know, that typological mindset of, you know, same space above the head, same space above the feet, below the feet, sorry. And it became quite tedious to sequence them. So I eventually came up with the grid pattern. This allowed each person to have their own space but also be interconnected with each other within this series. And I take a lot of my influence from the Beschers, their typologies of water towers, of industrial buildings and industrial sites. And although it may not be portraiture, the way that their book and also when their exhibitions are laid out in frames, the sheer volume of photographic information that is shouting at you from this page is both it's so intense, but at the same time I could spend hours flicking from page to page in their book, you know, moving from image to image on the wall. And I think this is what makes the typology so powerful. It's that repetitive nature that I can understand that some people may find, you know, a bit boring, a bit tedious, a bit, you know, what's the point of this? I'm seeing the same thing over and over again. But it's that consistency, it's that willpower to go out there and to make photographs of something and, you know, keep that consistent view, that consistent focal length, the consistent exposure is something that is so hard to do. I consider myself a bit of a typologist. I look at things in a typological way. You know, things like, you know, experimenting with how I lay things out in book sequences, on the wall, just, you know, in everyday life. Sometimes I find myself, you know, thinking everything should be, you know, set like that, and it took a long time to get out of that mindset and to start doing other things. But that is something that is what I pride myself on, is consistency. I love to be consistent, and although I'm not always consistent, when I am, I give myself a pat on the back, because I think for me, at the core of my work is being consistent, and this project, this series, these images taught me to be consistent, concise, and if you want good images and you want good negatives, you have to do it properly, and it takes a lot of willpower and it takes a lot of mistakes, believe me, to get it right. But when you do it, I'm sure you know, some of you probably know, it's just the most amazing feeling. So after this, moving on to other projects, I began to sort of backtrack this project a little bit, because I just thought, I'm not going to carry on with it. You know, I might do it at a later date. But I found myself making portraits of more and more people, and people close to me. You know, some people not so much, but it was this photograph of my friend Lily that I made, and I was so amazed by it. I was in a trance. I printed it out, I put it up on the wall, and it was something magical had happened. It was a complete mistake. It was a complete fluke that I just said to her, let's just go outside and let's just make a portrait. And we did, and I didn't expect much, to be honest with you. It was a pretty gloomy day. I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was a little bit rainy. The light, I thought, was really, really flat. And I thought I'd messed up the exposure as well as the development as well in the darkroom. But when I scanned it, I was just, I was a bit starstruck, really. It was something that helped me to center what my images should look like. This image will forever live on in my head as one of my best and favourite images. And as well as Lily being one of my best friends, she is one of the most incredible people to photograph. She is so interesting, and her being a photographer herself, she understands elements of it. She understands the time it takes to make a photograph on large format, the time it takes to set up. And while all this is happening, while you're, you know, setting the focus and things, she's completely still, completely calm, and she's in complete control of herself in front of the camera, which is what I wanted for all my subjects to be. I wanted them to be in control of themselves and how they are portrayed through the lens. The camera is, almost uncontrollable. I know that sounds weird. Being an 8x10 camera, you have almost the most control you can over creating a photograph. But because of different elements like the film, the age of the camera, light leaks, all that sort of stuff, I still cannot tell you how a picture is going to turn out when I take it. So this photograph of Lily, it was amazing. It was a great day, and I was so happy to share it with other people who, I got lots of good feedback on it. I got, a big pat on the back, and, this is, you're really striving, you're really, starting to go uphill here. And this photograph came at the time I was starting my last project for my university degree, called Death and Daisies. I'll speak about that another time. And it gave me the confidence to finally go out there and make portraits of people I didn't know. And this project was all shot on mainly digital and medium format. I moved away from the large format because I felt I needed more images to create a book in the end, which I did, which was I'm very pleased about. But I stopped making portraits of young women for this time as part of the Encounter series. I not only was the 8x10 camera going into repair, which was a bit, I was a bit sad about, it stopped me from making 8x10 photographs, which was okay, I was fine with that. And it wasn't until I made a portrait of my friend Jess. And I would say this photograph wasn't the most successful photograph, but it helped me it was a different sort of atmosphere, it was a different environment where I was photographing her, which was on the university campus. I would normally go to people's houses or, somewhere a bit more naturey in the garden, or my friend Martha was in the back of our car park in our university house. But this photograph of Jess, there was something different about it. I absolutely love it, because I know Jess and I know how she is in front of the camera. She's confident. She was in complete control of it, whereas I was not in control of the photograph. This one took a little bit more editing, I must admit, digitally editing. And it's not the best one in the series, but I've put it in there because I feel that it contributes to all of it. And it's not just about having, 24 fantastically photographed 8x10 images. It's about how they all work together. They can't all be, bangers. They can't all be incredible photographs. And a few in there aren't. A few in there a mistake. They don't necessarily work. But I put them in there because the whole flow of the project, the whole meaning about this word encounter, the encounter between the photographer and the camera and the sitter, is what is so important to me about this series. So the last and most recent photograph I made part of this series wasn't on 8x10, it was on my 5x4 Xiaomi, as you can see behind me. And I was so pleased with this image. It'd been maybe 4 or 5 months spent away from making photographs part of this project, and I was just making photographs here and there. This isn't for any more university projects or modules or there's no time frame, there's no limit on what you can do or what you can't do, which is what really excites me about being a graduate. Also a bit scary, but having the time to think and process and do other things and make work, about other things that you don't necessarily like or isn't necessarily successful, and you can come back to it. And I came back to the Encounters series, which is what sort of made me want to, make this video and sort of talk about future projects and things. And this portrait of Poppy was in her garden on the Isle of Wight, and I went down there for a few days, swimming in the sea, all that stuff. And I made a portrait of her and her mum as well. I made a couple that I'll show now. And this portrait of Poppy and her mum wasn't part of any series or anything, it was just one I made off a whim. It was obviously colour film on my 5.4, and I loved it. I just love it. there's no real deep meaning behind it. There's no backstory. There's no overly complex context to it. There's no, you know, deep narrative. It's just a fantastic image showing the love between a daughter and her mother, and, you know, Poppy's confidence coming into her own, you know, woman's body, and, you know, also the passage of time, how Poppy may look when she's older, when her, you know, how she look, you know, how her mum looks now, and this image alongside the image of Poppy on her own in black and white, it's a totally different story. It's a totally different feeling. The image of Poppy on her own, for me, feels a bit colder. It feels a bit more sort of, you know, look at me. And that's because when you put, you know, one image that is not to do with the other image next to each other, it creates a different narrative. It brings something else to, you know, to the project. And this colour photograph isn't included in this encounter series. I wish it was, but it doesn't feel right. And so this sort of magic of creating portraits on, you know, on a large format camera, you know, you choose your subject, you sit, or you make them stand, and you set up the camera. It takes, you know, 5-10 minutes to set up the camera, to focus it, to do the exposure, you know, to do all the readings. And then sometimes you have to do it again because they've moved a little bit, and all that pain that you go through sometimes, that, you know, you really just want to, you know, you just want to make a good photo. You know, there's been times when I've just been there, I just want this photo to be good. I haven't enjoyed it, and then I get the image and I'm like, why did I think that? This is incredible. This process, this, you know, this gift that we have as photographers to capture someone's physical and psychological state. It's amazing. I wouldn't trade it for the world. So I hope that you've enjoyed listening to me talk. This is the first video I'll do about this project. I'll probably talk in a bit more in depth sort of in other videos, but the reason I've sort of done this, you know, started this series, is to not only, you know, connect with other people and, you know, a community of, you know, strong photographers and things, but to also help myself, you know, articulate my words, articulate my project and my ideas and things, and not just talking about past projects, but also ones that I would like to do, and, you know, sharing some images that I'm making at the moment that aren't necessarily to do with anything, but I know in the back of my head that they're all connected somehow. I just need to figure out how they're connected. But yeah, thanks for listening.